Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. From the store, submitted by Lynn R. This happened 2 years ago before my mom and I moved. I was in college staying home to save money while I went to school and worked my part-time job, and my mom was recently divorced, so she enjoyed having me around. We did have 4 cats, but I joked that I didn't want her turning into crazy cat lady if she lived on her own. This really after the tumultuous relationship she had just ended with my dad. My dad has nothing to do with this story, and I love my dad very much, but he and my mom were just not a good mix. They did end things on a good note, and 2 years later are better friends than they were when they were married. But the events leading up to their breakup was not the best. Okay, I'll shut up about that. We lived in a decent neighborhood in a residential area of my city. My street was one of the only ones that had off-street parking for each individual home, as city life made everyone park in the street or wherever they could. It was kind of a nicer neighborhood from a time long gone by, while everything else eventually got built up around it. After my classes this day, which I was taking via Zoom due to the pandemic craziness, I would often go down to a supermarket about 2 blocks away to shop for dinner, which I always made for my mom. She busted her ass at work, and I always liked to prepare something for both of us to kind of end the day on a relaxing note. Plus, I love cooking. When this all started, that's exactly what I was doing. I was shopping at the store for the things I needed that night. Just a couple of things I had forgotten on my normal weekly shopping trip. As I was walking through the aisles, I noticed a man in his late 30s looking at me. At first I couldn't be sure because really, how can you be sure in situations like that someone really is looking at you, and not just something else in the store? But I confirmed it when he came over to where I was, and I was looking at some produce, and he said, "Excuse me, I don't want you to think I'm weird, but I wanted to tell you that you have really great legs. Have we met somewhere before?" Okay, that's not awkward. I know I'm in really good shape, and I take care of my body, and that wouldn't be weird if the situation hadn't been with a total stranger. But I gave off a meek thank you, and then I just got what I needed and moved away. As I walked around the rest of the store, I only saw him 1 or 2 more times, as I was busy shopping. I just chalked it up to a guy who didn't know how to talk to women and was giving it his best shot. I got all of my items checked out, and made my short walk home, kind of laughing about things and thinking about what I was going to tell my mom when I saw her. When I did get home, I put everything away and cracked out some of my assignments before I was going to get dinner going. I went to get the mail, and when I went out of my front door, for some reason I looked down the street and saw what looked like the same guy I saw in the grocery store. Now he was just standing on the sidewalk about 2 houses down from mine. It really was just a quick glance. But I noticed the red ball cap that he had been wearing and made the connection that it was the same guy. Not trying to be paranoid, I just went back inside and tried not to think of anything of it. I mean, who knows? Maybe he was a neighbor I had never seen before, or perhaps someone visiting someone in my neighborhood. We have a very tight-knit neighborhood, and all of us, for the most part, are on a first-name basis, but the truth is I couldn't say I really knew every single person that lived there. So I went back inside and started making dinner, and it was now around 4:30 in the afternoon, about 45 minutes before my mom would be home from work. The front doorbell rang, and I went to answer it, and of course just looked outside to see who it was before opening the door. There was no one there, so immediately I thought, UPS? FedEx? I opened the door to see if a package had been left, and again glanced up the street when I noticed there was no package on our front porch. What I did see was a figure running away that was wearing a red ball cap. Now I had a new set of questions bouncing around in my head. Was it the same guy? Was it a neighborhood kid that kind of resembled him that was just playing a prank on me? I mean, who hasn't done the whole ding-dong ditch thing in their life, right? I shut the door, got back to dinner, and waited for my mom to come home. When she did, I gave her a few minutes to chill out before dinner and mentioned the things that had happened that afternoon later. She kind of shrugged when I told her and said there were so many coincidences. How could we draw that it's the same guy you saw in the store doing those things and saying those things? We got on with the evening, and I had more reading to do for school, so after feeding the cats and playing with a couple of them before bed, I should mention 2 of them are extremely lovable. One is 50-50, and the other is a complete epitome of a nasty house cat. Loves you when he wants to, makes sure you know you are serving him, and is markedly not as affectionate as the other cats, but we all got along. But for some reason, Tom was hanging out near me. After trying to pet him for a few seconds, Tom jumped away and went up into the bay window looking out over our front porch. He is certainly a protector as much as he is a jerk, and I heard his low growl as he looked out the window. He has a growl that sounds kind of like he's purring, but there's a menacing aspect to it. You can tell that he's mad. I was switching off the lights in our living room, and when the room was dark, I walked over to where Tom was sitting. I asked him what he was looking at, and he kind of glanced over his shoulder at me and then went back to looking out the front window. I crouched next to him and pulled the curtain a little bit over to the side to see what he might be looking at, and knowing Tom, it was just someone taking their dog for a walk or something like that. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, and the street light right next to my yard and my neighbor's yard was shining brightly, and there was nothing going on. But it was at the edge of the light that I thought I saw someone standing looking at our house. My heart sank that it was the same person with the red ball cap, and that made me go up to my room that also looked out through the trees onto the street. It was wintertime, so there were no leaves on the trees, and when I got there, I looked over to the streetlight where we had just been looking. Sure enough, across the street, just in the shadows, was someone standing, wearing a red ball cap. The man just stood there for another few minutes before turning and walking across the street directly under the light, and that's when I knew it was the same guy. I called to my mom and I said, "Hey, I think that guy is outside again." And she came from her room into mine and looked out just as the figure was walking back up the street, out of range of our sight. Mom said to just make sure all the doors were locked, asked me what my schedule was the next day, and said that she would also be making sure to take better stock of the surroundings because at this point, things were getting weird. Nothing happened that night outside of the normal 2:30 a.m. cat freak-out any cat owner experiences. I mean, we love them, but they drive us crazy, right? The next morning, I got up at my normal time to go to the gym, and as I was backing down our driveway from our garage, I was looking on both sides in the dark to see if someone was standing outside our house. Trying to still not be paranoid, I kept thinking I would see someone, but didn't. So I just got my workout in and was on my way home knowing that I had to shower quick to get to my first class. My mom would already be gone by that time. So I got cleaned up, got something to eat, and then logged on for my Zoom meeting. It was a pretty boring lecture, and I got up to make some tea when I looked out my kitchen window into our small backyard and saw that I had forgotten to close the garage. That's when I saw him. Now I knew it was the same guy. Long hair, green military-style jacket, and a red ball cap. He was staring into our garage. I immediately went to the extra remote control for the garage that we keep in our kitchen. I hit the button and then went to the back door. I opened it and yelled out, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing in our backyard?" The guy never even looked in my direction, but immediately bolted down our driveway to the street. That's when I called my mom to tell her about what had happened, and she said to call the police. I called the non-emergency number and let them know that there was someone strange in our neighborhood that I had never seen before, but that I thought I had seen him at the store before and that he had talked to me. Without busting on our city's police, I got the "be sure to keep an eye out if you see him again and call us back" line. Okay, sure, I said, knowing that the only way anyone was going to come out was if something serious happened. Nothing happened for the rest of the day and the next evening, but things were about to escalate. The following day I did my gym routine, and I should mention the gym is about 2 miles from my house. I was talking to a friend as we walked back to our cars. It was just starting to get light out at that point when I stopped in my tracks. I noticed the same guy was standing at the edge of the parking lot of the gym. I told my friend that someone was following me, and we both went back inside right away. I told some of the guys at the gym and also called the police from there. I told them that someone I thought who had been hanging around my house was now hanging around the gym that I was at, and they told me to stay put. This time they did send someone out. The officer asked me for a full description of the person, what he'd been doing, and then asked me to retell the same thing I had told the police the other day. He asked me if he could follow me home, and I said yes, that would be great. He gave me his card and told me to call him if something else happened. He said he was going to make a full report and see if a patrol car could go up and down our neighborhood a couple of times during the day, just to see if anyone was hanging around, or maybe even possibly scare off someone who may have been hiding out. I was nervous about going home and being alone, so I decided I was going to get all my stuff for school and go to the public library rather than be home. I emailed my professors and said I was going to be working on assignments but wasn't going to be in class that day. I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea, but it made me feel better to be around other people. I stayed at the library for most of the day, outside of going to get something to eat around 1, and then I headed home. My cell phone rang, and it was my mom. She was already home for some reason, and was yelling into the phone that she saw the guy standing on our porch when she pulled in. Same jacket, same hair, same ball cap. I told her to call the police immediately and that I was on my way home too. At first she said to stay away, but I was not about to leave my mom home alone with some weirdo stalking around our house. I got home, and shortly after an officer pulled up in front of our house, as did another car. We again told them everything that had been happening, and they said that they were going to put a full description out on their radios for everyone to be on the lookout for anyone matching the description we gave them. I asked them about driving around our neighborhood, as the first officer I talked to said what they would do, and the officer confirmed that they had been doing it, but they hadn't seen anything or anyone out of the ordinary. We were both pretty scared at this point, my mom and I, that is. This was someone who was not going away, and even though I joked about it, was kind of freaked out, as well as whoever this guy was didn't seem to change his clothes. When I pointed that out to the police officer, the other officer said, "Hey, he might be a homeless person who's just confused." I almost laughed out loud at that, as it certainly was the same person I saw in the store, and if he was a homeless person that was confused, he sure had a funny way of showing that after our conversation and his weird compliment. The police left, and I made something to eat for dinner, but my mom and I were both on edge. Thankfully, it was Friday, and my boyfriend was coming over to visit. He lived in a town about an hour away and was planning on staying the weekend. We all just decided to have a couple of drinks and relax, and we were planning on going out to meet some of my friends, but suddenly I didn't feel like that and kind of wanted to just be with him at home. Chris is an awesome guy, and we're now engaged to be married, by the way. He tried to keep the evening light for us, knowing we were a little shaken up. And as the evening wore on and we had a couple of bottles of wine and my mom decided to retire for the evening, we were just kind of doing our thing, making out in the living room and talking about all the things school and future that were in our paths. Around 12:30, Chris looked up and said, "Someone's outside." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said that he could hear someone was on the porch, but wasn't sure if they were still there. The lights were off in the living room, and he went over to the bay window. He ripped the curtains open, and there, staring into the windows from the other side, was the guy. This was the first time we both got a look at him, and he didn't look anything like he looked in the store to me. Now he looked disheveled and really creepy. His eyes seemed to be bugging out of his head. Chris jumped back and then ran for the front door with me telling him to not open it. He wasn't listening to me as he ran out onto the front porch and tackled the guy. I mean, really tackled him. They both went over the porch railing into the bushes and onto the frozen ground. They were rolling all over the place. I was screaming, and my mom came down. The cats were inside going bananas, and that's when Chris let out a very loud yell. I was standing on the porch yelling if he was okay as he was clutching onto this guy, and thankfully my mom had called 911. Chris was yelling all kinds of swear words at this guy, and I could see darkness on the snow around our bushes, but not realizing at the time that it was actually blood. I kept screaming, and now lights were coming on in our neighbors' houses, and my next-door neighbor came out with a flashlight and immediately jumped towards Chris and the guy. It seemed like forever, but the cops finally showed up and grabbed both Chris and the guy. and they got him separated. I was trying to hold it together, but kept yelling for Chris, and my neighbor was trying to do his best to hold the other guy to help the police officer. Another police car showed up, and things started to get a little settled down. But the guy was screaming about someone named Scarlett, and that he had to see her. Chris finally piped up and said, I've been stabbed. And the cops attended to him quickly. It was kind of hard to see things in the dark, even though the streetlight was there. Chris had in fact been stabbed twice, once in his thigh and once in his arm. Now another cop car pulled up, and all of these people in the neighborhood were now surrounding our yard, and an ambulance was called for Chris. My mother was on the porch in hysterics, and I was crying my eyes out, trying to make sure Chris was going to be okay. He kept saying he was going to be fine, but the cop said, "You need to get to the hospital right now." They got the man in the red ball cap into a car and tried to start settling the neighborhood down. Another car showed up, and there were tons of questions for me and my mom, and of course Chris. One of the police officers found the knife that the man had stabbed Chris with, and it was a big survival-type knife. Actually, the officer called it a Rambo knife. I was asked to go with Chris to the hospital, and another officer would be following us there. Once we got there, Chris needed a bunch of stitches in his arm for a really big gash, but the stab wound in his right thigh needed staples. The knife was so sharp, it really split his leg open like a ripe melon. Chris was in stable condition, but had lost a lot of blood on our front yard as well as on the way to the hospital. He was going to be fine, so I breathed a sigh of relief about that. The officer who stayed with us asked way more questions for us and told us that the man was indeed homeless and mentally incapacitated. He was convinced I was his ex-wife when he saw me at the store. And then he was telling the police that he needed to talk to me about his divorce. He wasn't strung out on drugs, he just wasn't in his head anymore. A while later, I learned a little bit more about him, and it's a very sad story. His wife had cheated on him with his business partner, and the two of them had stolen all of the money out of the business and run off together. They had taken this guy for everything that he had in his life, and he kind of just went crazy and then went into the streets. This had happened about 8 years before all of this happened to me. We did have to press charges, and he was put into a criminal facility in a hospital. For all I know, he's still there, but he pled guilty to all the charges. I think someone convinced him that this was the best thing for him to do, and I like to think that maybe one part of his sane mind realized who he really was, where he was, and what he'd been up to. Chris healed just fine. My mom decided to move to Florida and sold the house, and I got my own place as I finished up school. Chris and I are planning on moving as well as soon as I finish my degree. So that's my story of basically being stalked by a guy who thought I was someone else. It's too bad he couldn't have talked to me, or maybe I could have talked to him to let him know that I wasn't who he thought I was. Maybe all of this could have been avoided. I'm very thankful to the police officers who showed up and took what I was saying seriously after the first call where I didn't think they cared at all. I am much more diligent about being with people when I go out now. Even though I know I'm safe, every once in a while I will see someone at a store or a bar or a restaurant who's looking at me, and I think, oh boy, is this going to be round 2? It's hard to get out of that mindset. Thanks for sharing my story if you do, and all I can say to everyone is be aware of your surroundings, and don't take things lightly if you have a gut feeling that something is wrong. I don't harbor ill feelings towards the guy who did this stuff, and I just hope that he's getting the help that he needs, and I hope that he can get back into life. I'm not sure if that's possible, but there's always hope. Bad Neighbor, submitted by Blonde Brian. This happened when I was 15 years old and my sister was 13. We grew up in a suburb of Rochester, New York, in a good neighborhood with a good school district and lots of friends everywhere we could walk or ride our bikes to. It was an awesome place to live and still is, even though I'm much older now and live in San Diego. My sister and me both wanted to get summer jobs for spending money outside of our allowance. So Jane and I would ask our neighbors if they had any jobs or chores they would like us to do on a weekly basis for the summer months. Mowing the lawn, watering flowers, whatever. I got a couple of lawn jobs that my sister would help me with, but we thought we hit the jackpot when one of our neighbors, I'll call Stan, asked if we were interested in light cleaning in his house. My mom said no at first, until Stan explained to her that we wouldn't be using household chemicals, just dusting and vacuuming, that sort of thing. I think the most caustic job we had was washing windows once in a while, and my mom was cool with that. I love my mom, but she was very protective. I mean, seriously, we could use all that shit at our house, but have someone else ask us to do it for money? That's crazy talk. Stan was going to pay us $20 a week, so we were going to split that, and I told her that I would give her some of my money for lawn mowing jobs. We were going to be making an extra bunch of bank for the summer. We both got a $10 allowance on top of that, so all this extra money was really great for us. The first time we went to Stan's house, he showed us all the stuff that he wanted us to do every Friday. And he showed us where he kept the vacuum, the dusting stuff, all that kind of thing. We figured it would only take us about an hour and a half to do everything, so it was a deal and a half in our world. Everything was fine, and we started working as soon as school ended in June. The only time we couldn't do anything was one week when my parents always took us on summer vacation, and Stan was fine with that. Stan had been in the neighborhood for as long as I can remember, was married but didn't have kids, just 2 corgi dogs that were a lot of fun to play with. We were doing our thing every week until the last week of July when we were going on vacation. We had a bunch of money stocked up for the trip. We were going to see my cousins in Pennsylvania, and we had a blast. Everything was just a great time. When we got home, our accumulated mail had been dropped off by the mailman, and my dad was going through all the stuff we had received. Most of it junk, I'm sure, just like today. But he came across a handwritten note and then looked at my mom and didn't say anything. When she asked him about it, he said he would talk to her in a few minutes and then asked me and my sister to keep unloading the Navigator. We didn't think anything about it. We were just ready to go see our friends and head over to my friend Randy's pool for a swim. This was on a Sunday, and when we got back, we completely forgot about the look my dad gave my mom when he read the note. That Monday, I was getting ready to go out that morning to do one of the lawns I had to normally do on a weekend, but my dad asked me to stay home for a little bit. I called the neighbor whose lawn I cut, and he just joked with me that if I took any longer, the grass was going to grow over his house. I told him I would be there later that day. At about 10 that morning, a guy came to our house who turned out to be a detective with the police department. He introduced himself, and my father invited him in and told me and my sister to go in the backyard for a minute, but not to go anywhere else. I immediately thought of the note, but being dutiful to my parents, I just did as my father asked and dragged my sister with me. It was then that I realized my mom had stayed home from work, too, so something certainly was up. My dad called for us to come back inside after a bit and told us that the detective had some questions for us, and we needed to be truthful with our answers. The detective asked us about what we did at Stan's house, and we told him about our cleaning job that we'd been doing for the past couple of weeks. He nodded and wrote things down and asked about what rooms we went into, what kind of chores we did, all that stuff. Seemed pretty straightforward. And then I asked, "Are we in trouble?" The detective looked at my dad and then looked at us and said, "No, you're not in any kind of trouble." But then he started asking questions about if we noticed anything strange in Stan's house. We both said no. We just did our cleaning thing and sometimes stayed longer to play with the dogs. I should mention that Stan and his wife were not home while we cleaned the house. I mean, they had jobs too. The detective thanked us for our time, and then my dad and he went out into our front yard and kept talking. After he drove away and my dad had come back inside, I asked my dad what was up, and he said he would tell me about it in a little while. Then he made a phone call and took a walk up the street to a neighbor's house. I had asked him if I could go and cut my lawn, and he said yeah. We had no idea what was happening, but by the time I was finished cutting my lawn, Randy had called me and asked if I wanted to go swimming. So I got permission from my mom, and that's what I did. When I got home for lunch, my dad and mom were at our kitchen table talking, and they didn't look very happy. The detective had come back to talk to my dad, and he just seemed very angry. I asked him if everything was okay and if we were in trouble. He just took me by the arm and gave me a big hug. My sister came into the room, and he did the same thing to her. My dad was a very gruff guy and did not show his emotions very much when I was growing up. As he's gotten older, he's much more emotional, especially when it comes to his grandkids. I guess he was saving all of that up for them. And that's okay, because I loved my dad and mom no matter what. My dad asked me to get him a beer out of the fridge, and I did, also asking for the customary sip. He smiled and said, "Go ahead." Everything seemed to be calmed down. But later that day, the detective came back one more time and spoke with my father privately. It wasn't until the next day that my dad sat me and Jane down and said the detective was coming back over. And when he got there, he opened up a manila envelope and showed some pictures to us. They were pictures of me and Jane at Stan's house as we were cleaning. We both looked at each other and answered the detective when he asked us, "Is that you?" And we said, "Yeah, that's us." He didn't say anything else and just nodded. And then he had some more pictures of me without my t-shirt on as I worked. Stan's house didn't have air conditioning, and it did get hot in there, so sometimes I would take my t-shirt off. And my little sister would work in her sports bra. We didn't think anything of it. We were home alone. It's my sister, for crying out loud, and no one else was around, so we didn't think it was weird. What we didn't know is that Stan had asked another neighborhood kid to fill in for us on the Friday that we had been on vacation. And that's when the trouble started. It was a kid I knew in the neighborhood named Ben, but wasn't friends with him because he was only 11 or so. Ben had been asked to do what we did, but Stan was home when Ben was there. Stan had apparently asked Ben to work wearing a pair of shorts that Stan asked him to wear, saying that they were special cleaning shorts. They were just like regular bike shorts, but Stan also asked him to take off his t-shirt. Ben did what he was told, but immediately told his mom when he got home after getting his money. Ben's mom then called the police, as she was a single mom and didn't want to confront Stan or Stan's wife on her own when she knew something was very wrong. Stan had also taken pictures of Ben, which the police went over and asked him about. Stan admitted to taking the pictures and was reluctant to show the police the pictures he had taken. But when he did, he wasn't careful with the printouts that he had, and the police noticed other pictures in this scrapbook that he had. This led to more questions for Stan, and eventually, in the next 2 days before we got home, the police raided his house. They found all kinds of child pornography on his computer, including the pictures of me and my sister. Obviously, we weren't in any kind of pornographic picture, but we were still lumped in with all these other kids. Stan had been home the entire time we were doing our job for him, but he had been hiding and taking pictures of us as we worked. Like I said, the other pictures were terrible, according to my parents, and we were never really shown what they were. I can only imagine. Stan was arrested for trafficking kiddie porn and was convicted and is now serving a sentence in prison. He got 16 years for the amount of stuff that he had, and he was also sharing and trading it on the internet in various chat rooms and websites. Whenever he does get out, he's also a registered sex offender, wherever he goes. All I do know is that his wife left him, but I think he is up for release this year. It's creepy as hell for me and my sister to this day to think that our pictures had been stored with some of the most vile garbage that can possibly be created out there. What kills me is that he had actual photographs that he had to have had developed or printed out on his own computer. Those were of us. Why he did that, I have no idea. But in one instance, I feel glad that he did, because it was his downfall, and he got caught for all the other crap that he had. Goes to show you that you never really know who your neighbors are. Stan and his wife always seemed like regular people and joined in neighborhood get-togethers all the time. Who knows what else he was up to, but I'm glad he was arrested and sent to jail. Sick people like that don't ever change, and it sounds like he had a collection that went back many, many years. I don't think about this all the time, but I thought I would send my story into you, and as I finish writing this out, I'm going to check on my kids who are now fast asleep. I'm a trusting person, but when it comes to my kids, I have vowed never to be lax. The thought of them ever ending up in pictures like that on someone's computer or wherever else is terrifying to me. Something Wrong at Our New House, submitted by Dan W. This all began when my wife and I decided to build a new house rather than buy an existing one. We did a lot of research as to where we wanted to build our permanent home and found a great spot in a new limited subdivision. When I say limited, I don't think that's a technical real estate term, but it was a one-street neighborhood surrounded by forestry. We were going to live at the very end and had 3 acres in our backyard and off to the side, which was a little bit larger than most of our neighbors' yards. Part of the reason that we wanted the place in the first place. It was exciting to be doing the project from the ground up, working with the architects and their design people. The whole process took months, and I spent a lot of time after work and on weekends popping out to look at the progress and meet with contractors and that sort of thing. Soon we had our house, as other houses were going up in the neighborhood too. I'll take a few seconds and describe the house for the rest of the story. There was a main foyer with a large staircase after the foyer in our front hall when you entered. Off to the right was my home office and library. Off to the left was our formal living room that opened up into our dining room. The dining room and kitchen were open to each other, separated by a breakfast bar, and on the other side of that was our massive family room that opened up onto our deck off the back of the house. There was another door to the deck from our dining room as well. We had a 3-car garage, 4 bedrooms upstairs with an attic cupola as a 3rd floor where my kids had a lot of their stuff. At the time, all of our kids were home. Joe was 18 getting ready for college, Jody was 15 and in high school, and my little guy, Will, was 12. I have a successful business as a clinical psychologist that I run from the home. My wife is a realtor who will smack me for referring to our neighborhood as limited. I suppose I should have checked with her before writing this, but she happens to be out of town, so that's my excuse. Yeah, I could call or text, but that doesn't matter. The house was finally built and we moved in mid-August of that year. Perfect timing for our kids to be ready for school and a couple of weeks to get settled in. Everyone was loving the house and the yard and the woods right next door, and my wife decided we should have Thanksgiving celebrated at our place that year. I don't have a very large family, but my wife does, and I love to cook, so of course I said it was a great idea. Her brother and sister came with their families on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. My 2 nephews and 2 nieces, both 2 with each brother and sister-in-law, were obviously with them. All of them were in their teens, and I was surprised that they were actually having a good time. You know how teens can get sullen on family vacations, but my kids got along with them very well, and half the time they were playing video games and just laughing. That night I was up later than everyone getting things ready for the next day so as to not have a mad rush with food on Thanksgiving. Everyone else headed off to bed, and I kept up with my prep and a couple of beers. My brother-in-law stayed around too. We were both talking late into the night, and ended up falling asleep in my living room. I woke up around 3 in the morning, noticing that it was really cold in the house, despite a fire in the fireplace and the heat on. My brother-in-law was in a recliner and sawing wood, so I just got up quietly to see the thermostat. It was working, and that's when I noticed the front door and storm door were wide open. I closed them after looking around outside and went back to the living room to wake my brother-in-law up for bed. In the time that I had walked to the front foyer, the back door to our deck had been slid open and was letting the cold air in as well. I looked at my brother-in-law, but he was out like a light. I figured somehow one of the kids had opened or left the doors open in the front, and the wind had knocked them open completely. Looking back, it was a stupid thought, as there was no way that could have possibly happened. I still don't have any explanation for the back sliding door, but I made a point to tell everyone to keep the doors shut as I wasn't heating the outside. I was turning into my father. I got into bed, as did my brother-in-law, and I knew I would have to be up by 6 to get my smoker ready and another turkey ready for the inside oven. Thankfully, I had done all the prep work the day before. Yay me. When I woke up, my wife was barely stirring, and I mentioned the doors to her. She told me that she had personally locked the front door before going upstairs and couldn't tell me why they were open. I told her I was going to remind everyone to make sure the doors were shut, and she sleepily agreed and went back to sleep, saying she would be up by 7. The house was totally quiet as everyone was sleeping in. Perfect, I thought. I could have my first cup of coffee and get things rolling. I love my family, but moments like that are awesome to me. Knowing that they're all there and safe, having a chance to clear my head and be thankful for everything we had, and then be able to share my love with them and my food later on. Sounds cheesy, but hey, that's me. It's the truth. It was about 6:30 after I had gotten the smoker going out on the deck and came back into the kitchen. I was sipping my coffee and I heard a thumping down in the basement. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, so I wandered over, opened the door and flicked on the lights and walked downstairs. The thumping was getting louder as I walked down the stairs, and I couldn't think of what was making that noise. Then I thought maybe my wife had woken up and thrown some laundry in the washing machine and it had gotten off kilter. That was my explanation. As soon as I got to my basement, I looked around and turned on the other recessed lighting, and the thumping stopped. We have a finished basement with another living area down there, a pool table and a bar for entertaining. For 1 second, I thought maybe some of the kids had come down here to this gaming system and maybe fallen asleep on one of the couches. But upon inspection, the basement was empty. I stood there just trying to figure out what that thumping noise was. And that's when both the dryer and washer doors opened and slammed shut on their own. I had my back to the laundry area when this happened, so I didn't actually see it, but I sure as hell heard it. I jumped as I turned around and then walked over to the machines. I stared at them for a minute and then shrugged my shoulders. Was I just hearing all this in my head? As a clinical psychologist, I know that this is totally possible, but I was trying to add everything up. The strange open doors, the weird sound down here, and I was sure I heard the dryer and washing machine doors open and shut. I wasn't jumping to any conclusions. I was trying to think of rational explanations for everything. But I also knew that everyone was going to be waking up soon, and I needed to get my breakfast pizza and casserole in the ovens to warm up. I walked back upstairs and turned the lights off, and as soon as I got to closing the door, I heard the dryer and washing machine doors open and slam shut again. I couldn't figure it out. I figured I would talk to my wife about it when I got a chance, but I didn't want to tell the entire family strange things were going on and run the risk of ruining Thanksgiving. I was a staunch disbeliever in the paranormal, and am still skeptical today, even after telling the rest of my story. I could hear people starting to get up and move around upstairs, so I got breakfast things going, got the big dining room table set for everyone, and waited for them to come down. My wife came down, as did everyone else, in their pajamas, wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving. My brother-in-law asked me about the smoker and offered his help, which I gladly accepted. Everyone was enjoying their coffee and juice and breakfast when I pulled my wife aside and told her about what I had heard in the basement. She had a strange look come over her face and said, "Well, I wanted to tell you something too." I asked her what was up, and she said while she was washing her face in our master bath, the tub faucet came on and the jets on our Whirlpool tub started up. She was worried that maybe there was an electrical problem with the tub, but that didn't explain why the water turned on. I shook my head and said, "Something very strange is going on here." We both agreed to keep things to ourselves, but she is an avid nut about the paranormal, and giggling told me she was wondering what else the day would bring. I told her that wasn't funny, gave her a quick swat on her ass, and kissed her and said Happy Thanksgiving. The rest of the morning was most of everyone just kind of wandering around as we were going to eat at 3. Kids were playing their video games and some were watching the Macy's Day Parade, and everyone was talking amongst themselves about girls and boys and all that kind of thing, except for my 12-year-old and my 11-year-old nephew. I know this for a fact as my nephew wandered into the kitchen and out of nowhere said, "Girls are gross." I asked him why he thought that, and he said they get their hair everywhere. And I laughed and went back to the deck to check on the smoker. When I went back in for another cup of coffee, my brother-in-law was standing in the kitchen. He also had a weird look on his face and said, "Hey, man, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" He leaned in and said in a low voice, "Have you noticed anything strange ever happening in your house? I mean, the place is awesome. I know it's brand new. I'd like to think it's just settling. But I was just upstairs getting my clothes ready and about to jump in the shower when the closet door in our room opened and shut a few times. I mean, I actually saw it happen on the last time." I didn't know whether to tell him about anything else I had noticed going on, but said, "Man, that's really odd. The house is solid. I mean, I watched the thing being built." He just shook his head and said, "Well, maybe I had one too many beers last night." but in my mind I thought, he only had 2, and my brother-in-law can tie one on. I didn't say anything else, and he said he was going to get ready and tell the troops that they needed to get dressed as well. Not for the rest of the day, but he was organizing a touch football game in the yard with the kids. That's an old tradition in their family I had forgotten about, and I said I was going to be there too. No way I was missing out on some early football. After making sure the turkey was doing its thing in our oven and the other turkey was smoking away, I went into our side yard where everyone was throwing the ball around and trying to divide up into teams. We started playing after a few minutes, and there were tons of laughs, and my neighbors came over with their kids to join in. After a while, we took a break to grab some water, and my neighbor's son, who was a brilliant kid, asked me who the girl was in the window and why she wasn't playing football with us. I said, "What?" And he pointed up to one of our bedroom windows and said, "That girl with the long black hair, how come she's not playing?" My niece on my sister-in-law's side has long black hair, but she was playing with us, as was my niece on my brother-in-law's side, but she's blonde. When I looked up at the window, there was no one there, and I said, "Who are you talking about?" And he said, "I just saw a young girl with long black hair looking out at us." Normally, I would have said that he saw a shadow or something, or maybe the glare of the really weak sun in our cloudy weather. But of course, I thought of the other things going on. I just told him he was mistaken. Everyone was out here having fun, and we should get back to the game. After another half hour or so, we broke up the game and all went inside laughing, and my sisters-in-law and wife yelling at everyone to go directly to the basement and get our muddy clothes off. The 3 women had arranged other clothes for them to tramp through the house before getting showered up in the start of our meal. We all got cleaned up, and my wife came into the bathroom as I was shaving. She shut the door, and she had that same strange look on her face. I knew something was going on, and she said, "Something is happening in this house, and I don't know what it is." She told me that after she had thrown some laundry in the washing machine from the clothes that we had been wearing outside, she'd gone upstairs into the kitchen, but then heard a thumping in the basement. When she went down there, the entire load that had been put into the washing machine was spread out all over the floor. The other clothes were still piled on top of the machine, and the door was wide open. It had never even started. I immediately asked my wife if she was mistaken about putting laundry in, and she said she was not. My wife may be into the paranormal, but she's a straight shooter and would not have made anything like that up. I then told her about the neighborhood kids seeing someone standing in the window of our front bedroom. We were both getting concerned about what was happening. Something certainly strange was going on. We all got downstairs, and people were jumping into the charcuterie board and relish tray, gearing up for the main meal. All of the adults were enjoying a glass of wine or a beer, and my wife poured herself a large glass, and I knew she did so because of everything that had been happening and everything that was bouncing around in her head. I checked on the turkeys, and they were almost ready, and then I went upstairs to grab something, and my niece, the young lady with the long black hair, was coming down the stairs. I said, "Hey, kiddo, what's up?" as I was walking into the foyer, and she was about to pass me. I noticed that our glass chandelier we had hanging from the second-floor ceiling started to swing back and forth as she went under it. I'm telling you, it was right out of that movie Amityville Horror. Thankfully, she didn't see it, but I did, and the chandelier was still swaying back and forth as I went upstairs. I stood at the top of the stairs watching it as it slowed down, and my mind began to race. I remembered something from my college studies and post-grad work on my way to my doctorate about parapsychology, but never really gave it a thought. Now I was trying to think back about its connection with teenagers and poltergeist phenomenon. I was well aware of all the bullshit nonsense that goes with the paranormal, but something strange was happening, and the fact that 2 of the odd things happened involved my niece had my mind running. We enjoyed Thanksgiving dinner and dessert, and everyone was going to just chill out for the rest of the afternoon, watching football or playing video games or just catching up and talking like families do. My wife had solved her problem with the wash and had successfully gotten a bunch of clothes clean, and I was on my 3rd beer, just enjoying myself, despite all the strange things that had been happening. My brothers-in-law were taking cat naps, and I could hear the kids upstairs laughing and doing regular teenage stuff. Just sitting in my chair watching the game, I heard a loud crash come from the kitchen, The ladies were up in the formal living room up front, and I could hear them chattering away until the loud crash. I jumped up and ran into the kitchen before anyone else, and saw that a large stack of plates waiting to go in the dishwasher that had been sitting on the counter were now smashed all over the floor. No one was in the kitchen. There's no way anyone could have been in there, as I would have seen them walk through our family room, or at least walking out of the kitchen into the dining room, or back into the living room. My wife came in and bumped into me, and I just looked at her wide-eyed. I was trying to piece all of this together. What the hell was going on here? I made some lame excuse to everyone that the dishes must have been on the edge of the counter and fallen off by accident. I blamed myself for being careless, and my sister-in-law and wife helped me clean up the mess. The kids upstairs never heard anything, and none of them came down. The rest of the day was quiet, and around 7 in the evening or so, my brothers-in-law whipped up some turkey sandwiches and busted out the relish tray and other things that had not been eaten during our dinner. I love that part of Thanksgiving, the second Thanksgiving. Everyone was now hanging out in the family room and debating what movie we were going to watch that night. My niece, the blonde one, left the room and went upstairs. And when she came back, she had a strange look on her face. She actually looked like she was upset, and her mother asked her what was wrong. She said she didn't want to talk about it and motioned for her mom to join her in the kitchen. They both left, and we decided on a movie, and everyone got settled in to enjoy it. My sister-in-law came back in the room with my niece and then asked my other sister-in-law if she could speak with her. They both went into the kitchen, and I went in behind them on the auspices of getting beers for my brothers-in-law, but I also wanted to hear what they were going to say. I didn't eavesdrop. I made it clearly known that I was there, and they didn't care. My sister-in-law told my other sister-in-law that her daughter had bumped into her daughter on her way to the bathroom. She said that my black-haired niece was standing in her way on the landing upstairs, and started to say some very awful things to my blonde-haired niece. She was calling her a bitch and saying that she was a worthless human being, and some other things I don't want to repeat here. My sister-in-law went out to talk to her daughter about this, who of course denied being upstairs. Everyone else quickly heard what was going on. Word travels fast in 2 rooms. And we all said that was impossible, because my black-haired niece had been in the living room with us. My niece, who went upstairs, was the only one who left the room. Without going into a panic, I said everyone was probably just tired from the day, and we should all just watch the movie and relax. Of course, I got looks from my wife and my brother-in-law who had experienced the weird things earlier that day. But we all enjoyed the movie, and as the night wore on, everyone started to drift off or went upstairs to bed. What happened that night was very odd. When everyone was in bed and asleep, anyone who had a cell phone received a call at the same time. It was from an unknown number, and it came at 2:47 a.m. Everyone's phone either vibrated or rang. Of course, it woke a lot of us up. Those who answered didn't hear anything except a static noise, me included. I didn't know about everyone getting the phone call until the next morning, but the front door and storm door once again were wide open when I wandered downstairs before everyone else. I wondered if there was a connection about those two and the time that they happened. I didn't say anything and just shut the door. We had plans to go to Niagara Falls that day and then hit up an outlet mall in the area so we would all be out of the house, and I thought that was a good idea. Stop thinking about this weird shit until everyone went home, and then try to take a look at it objectively. My wife agreed. We had a blast at the attractions, even though everyone had been to Niagara Falls before. Then we went shopping and then got some dinner out. We got back to the house at around 9:30 that night, and all of the lights in the house were on. I never leave the lights in my house on, save for the front foyer and the outside lights, and I control those with my phone. As we were pulling up my driveway, the front bedroom where my nieces were staying was flicking on and off. I looked at my phone and the programming that I had set up, but it showed that all the lights were off except for the foyer and the outside lights. Everyone got out of the vehicles and was going inside, and the minute the garage door to the house opened, the light upstairs stopped flickering, and all of the lights in the house went out. I had no idea what to do. Everyone saw that. I said to my brother-in-law, there must be something in the electric, and I'd have to get my electrician out to take a look at it. but my brother-in-law, who had experienced the closet door, just looked at me skeptically. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, and everyone was heading home the next day. We saw everyone off and just had that day to crash as our family. Now here's the stranger thing. Nothing happened. I mean, nothing happened for months. Nothing happened for almost the next year. No funny noises, no lights, no sounds, no doors opening, nothing. My wife and I discussed it over and over and could not figure out what was going on, but we both deduced that it had something to do with my niece. Nothing had happened before she got there. Nothing happened after she left. I mean, we weren't looking to blame her for anything, but the coincidence was there. However, things did come back when my niece and sister-in-law visited that summer. A lot of the strange things started happening again. Doors were opening and closing so much and so loud that everyone noticed what was going on. One evening when my niece was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, the entire bed she was on slid all the way across the room and bumped into the wall on the other side of the room. My daughter was in the room to see that happen. Of course, everyone was freaking out, and I was trying to calm everyone down, but my sister-in-law decided that they were going to cut their trip short a day, and my daughter was going to go and stay with them at their house for a week. Again, once my niece left, nothing happened in the house. When I called my daughter during the week just to say hi and check in on her, I asked if anything weird was happening at their house, and she said no. Everything had been awesome. They'd been swimming in their pool, and they went to movies and were just having a good time. Then came Thanksgiving this past year. Again, we were having everyone over, and I knew everyone was thinking about what had happened the year before. But nothing happened. Everything was normal and fine. I have zero explanation for what happened, but after talking to colleagues and dipping into what are often referred to as the pseudosciences, I wonder if there is some shred of credibility to the theories that poltergeist activities surround teenage girls and that time of their life they are growing up in. I don't know, and I can't say. All I can say is nothing like that has ever happened again since this past summer. My wife, of course, read a bunch of stuff on the internet that was a little too far out there for me, but she is convinced that my niece somehow was affecting our house with her abilities that she wasn't even aware of. As my background is what it is, I've never called any of these so-called paranormal investigators to come in and help with anything. But I did talk to some friends who knew some people in a skeptical society who, without seeing anything or experiencing anything, advised there was likely some logical explanation, and we were just not coming up with it. At this point, I don't care. I would rather have my dream house to be exactly what it is, a dream house. I don't care to have any of that crap ever happen again. And here's to 2023 being paranormal free for my family. She Was Magic, submitted by Cherry O. I lost my grandmother when I was 32 years old. I was very close with her as I was the only granddaughter she had out of 7 grandchildren. Sure, she loved my brothers and cousins, but there was a bond between us that went very deep. I was into just about everything she shared with me. Her love of baking and knitting, bingo and game shows on TV. I still do all those things, and I am a certified game show nut. I was even on The Price is Right once, but never got out of Contestants Row. But my grandmother was so proud of me, even though I didn't do much to get on other than the standard stuff they ask you to do to be chosen as a contestant. It was a sketchy time in my mid-20s after that. A time where I made a lot of bad decisions in relationships and personal habits. I fell in love with a man who would go on to marry me at 25, beat the shit out of me for the first time at age 26, and introduced me to speed on top of my already hefty drinking problem. I always kept my job, always went to church, but sometimes wearing a little more makeup to hide the beatings, and usually drunk to numb the pain. But my one constant was my grandma. She was always there. At first my family was too, including my brothers. But after my mom died, telling me I was breaking her heart by staying with my man although she was really dying of cancer. I should also mention my dad died when I was 12 in a car accident. My brothers blamed me for worrying my mother and pushing her into a too young and untimely death. They said me hanging out with the wrong crowd and marrying my husband put too much worry into her. Maybe they're right. I don't know. After my mom died, my grandma was all I had, and she was much more patient with me than my mom or my brothers. There were plenty of nights that I stayed with her, afraid to go home to my husband when he was on a run, and one time he did come looking for me there, but just one time. While I was hiding there, he showed up hammered and banging at the back door, yelling for me. We were watching TV when it happened, and I just cringed. Grandma patted me on the knee and said, "Stay right here. I'll be right back." I did as I was told, and I don't know what she said to him, but things got very quiet, and she came back in the room smiling. He left and never once came back to my grandma's house for as long as he lived. When I asked her what she said to him, she only replied, "Magic, honey." She smiled. Magic that will one day take care of him and take care of you, but not in the same way. That night she talked to me straight and told me I needed to get out from under him, that I was welcome to stay with her as long as I wanted to stay, and it would be another year before I left my husband and took her up on that offer. When I did, my grandmother got me into a rehab and supported me getting clean of drugs and booze, and then I went to live with her. My husband and I were separated but not divorced. He never came by, but he would send letters and emails saying the foulest things to me. He tried to paint me poorly on Facebook with old friends and even tried to get me fired from my job when I went back to it. Thankfully, my boss is great and supported me through everything. He still does. But then my husband made a mistake. He sent a threat to my grandma, and she did not take it in stride like I took my lumps and threats. I'd seen her angry before, but this was a different look. I'd never seen it. Her blue eyes seemed to flash like ice under the moon. And when I asked her if she was okay, she just nodded and said, "Oh yes, I'm fine, honey." Another year went by and I was finalizing my divorce when a second threat was made to my grandma. This time her eyes seemed to go black. That was also the night she told me that she had been sick for a while and had hidden it from me. Cancer, just like my mom. Her prognosis was not good, and she decided she didn't want any treatment, didn't want to fight, and by the time I found out, it was too late to do anything. I cried and cried when she told me, and I even got angry and shouted at her. She just hugged me and told me it was going to be all right. That's when I saw the letter my husband had sent to her. It was a threat that he was going to kill us both. Real genius right there. I was planning on using it as evidence in the divorce and for a stronger restraining order. But I wouldn't have to. 2 nights after all that happened, there was a bad thunderstorm. I woke up with the lightning flashing and my grandmother sitting in a rocking chair in my room. She was smiling at me and said my troubles were over with my husband, and her pain was over too. I asked her what she meant, and she just smiled and said, "Magic, honey, magic." I got up to give her a hug, but as I got near her, she held up her hand and said, "I love you, honey. Please stay healthy for me. Find a new man, have kids, and eventually a granddaughter of your own. I have to go. I love you so much." Then she faded away. Just like that, faded right out of sight. I stood there for a second before running down the hall to her bedroom to find her lying in bed with a smile on her face. I touched her cold hand and knew that she was gone. I cried for the longest time before calling my oldest brother to let him know that she had gone, and he said he was on his way over and would call the police. It wasn't for another 2 days that I had found out that my now ex-husband had died the same night. He was having a bunch of his asshole drinking buddies over for a party to celebrate his soon divorce. I guess they were all on our old back porch, and he kept telling the dipshits that he saw a flashing light in the rain at the edge of the yard. Beer in hand, he went to investigate, and all they heard him yell in the darkness was, "You! What are you doing here, you crazy bitch?" Then he yelled out my grandmother's name, "Lana," followed by a "No! No!" 2 of the guys made official statements to that. The time of death was just before my last conversation with my grandma, or what I believe was her spirit. I'm 43 years old now. I have a great husband and 3 kids. I have a special room where I do all my knitting with a TV that I only watch game shows on. I have pictures of my grandma all over the room. Pictures of her alone, pictures with my family, and pictures of both of us throughout our lives. When any of my kids look at them and ask, "What was great-grandma like?" I say, "She was magic." This is a true story, whether you believe it or not. My grandma was magic until the very end. Run-in with drug dealers, submitted by Patrick22. When I was in high school in the suburbs of a larger town out in the Midwest, I was a pretty decent football player, wide receiver to be exact. This has nothing to do with the story, but I also served as the team kicker for whatever reason. I had a good leg and was in track, so I guess that's why they picked me rather than having a full-time kicker. I was also a wrestler, and this happened between football and wrestling season. There was a guy on the football team who was 2 years older than me. I was a sophomore at the time. And for whatever reason, he didn't like me to begin with. Most of the guys on varsity were juniors and seniors, but there were a couple of sophomores like myself. This guy I'll call Bob would harass me all the time in practice, and was a lot bigger than me, so I just shut my mouth and took it. But the real trouble came towards the end of the season, when his girlfriend dumped him for me. I knew the trouble that I was bringing on myself if I started dating the girl, but she was a year older than me, she was super hot, and my loins couldn't say no. Of course, that didn't go well with him. Bob was more than pissed. He would seek me out in the hallways and try to start fights with me, and I kept telling him I wasn't going to fight because I didn't want to lose my wrestling season or get into any other kind of trouble. He would just call me a pussy and push me, but he never threw a punch. Friends between us told me how much he hated me and that he was planning on kicking my ass at some point, and how they didn't want to get involved. They liked us both, and they told me that they kept trying to talk to him, but he was so pissed that his girlfriend dumped him. I was dead meat in his eyes. Ah yes, the stupidity of youth. Get dumped by a girl and beat up the guy she starts dating, like it's that guy's fault. Anyway, despite it being colder, I was at the outdoor track of the high school one evening running to cut some weight and just stay in shape for wrestling season. I took wrestling a hell of a lot more seriously than I did football and was planning on improving my record that year. The year before I came in third in our regionals, and this year a goal of mine was to win and go to states. So I was just out there as it was getting dark and thinking I needed to wrap up my run and get home for dinner, when I noticed a figure step onto the track about 200 meters away of the 400-meter track. Whoever it was just stood there, and was far enough away that I couldn't see who it was. Well, when I got to that end of the track where the gate to get to the parking lot was, it was clear to me that it was Bob. It was also clear that he was there for one reason: to fight me. I showed no fear as I got closer to him and stopped about 10 feet away from him. He just looked at me and said, "Okay, fag, this is it. No one else is around. No one else needs to know." Obviously, I knew what he was talking about, so I said, "Look, man, I'm not going to fight you." He called me a pussy, and I said, "Look, man, I know I can kick the living shit out of you, but that doesn't change anything. We could both get kicked off our teams." He was on the basketball team. I took a step to kind of move around him, but he moved in front of me again and said, "Nope, we're doing this." At that end of the track where the parking lot was also the bus garage. Behind that was a dip that went down to a little ravine where a creek ran by our high school. It was usually a hangout for all the heads to smoke their weed and do their thing without prying eyes seeing them. Again, I tried to use reason with Bob, but there he was wanting to fight. That's when a car pulled up and 3 dudes I recognized as grads, like graduated from high school 3 or 4 years ago, got out of the car and started walking along the bus garage. I don't think they noticed us right away, but then I heard a noise behind me and turned slightly to see 2 other older guys I had never seen before coming up from the ravine. Had we known exactly what was going down, I'm sure Bob and I would have run before we finally did. But it took the 2 older guys finally noticing us after the other guys met up with them that we knew something was wrong. Without going into all the details, we were witnessing a pretty big drug deal for our town. We found out that later after telling some friends what had happened to us. As Bob and I stood there looking at them, one of the guys noticed that we were standing on the track and yelled over, "The fuck are you looking at?" The guy he was with said something to him that we couldn't hear. And then all 5 guys were looking at us, and even in the dark I could see 2 of them take out knives. I said to Bob, "You're going to have to put your fight on hold." He just said, "Yep," and we started to back up a little bit. There was no way we could go through the gate to get to the parking lot, and the woods at the far end of the track were a bad idea. The only outlet for me in my mind was the far side of the track. There was a fence there that led up to the baseball fields, wide open fields. Nowhere to hide, but a good place to run. I certainly didn't want to mess with anyone with a knife, and I certainly didn't want to deal with a drugged out bunch of guys with knives. I whispered to Bob, "We need to book it to the baseball fields. I don't think they'll be able to catch us." We started to turn, and we heard one of the guys yell out, "Hey, assholes, get over here now!" That was our cue to start running, and run we did. Even though Bob was bigger than me, he had his sprint shoes on that night. We hauled ass over to the other side of the track as the guys gave chase to us. We cleared the fence, got onto the baseball fields, and kept running. I turned around once to see the other guys getting over the fence, still chasing us. We kept running until we got up to the outside wall of the school and ran alongside that. I hadn't even thought of my car that I'd left back in the parking lot. And when I did, I thought, fuck it, I'll go back and get it later. Bob actually didn't live that far away and had walked over to fight me. Anyway, we got to the edge of the school and ran to the other parking lot that ran in front of the school. We came up short about halfway as we saw car lights staring right at us from the parking lot. It was the 2 older guys, the drug dealers. They stood there and one called out, "Yoo-hoo, get your asses over here." I thought to myself, this is not good. Then I got a brilliant idea. I told Bob, "Hey, if you're looking for a fight, I think it's standing right in front of us." He kind of grunted, and we both took off like rockets towards the 2 guys who I think were a little bit surprised we were running right at them. I took one guy and Bob took the other, and we plowed right over them. They fell onto their asses and leather jackets, and we kept running. As we were rolling along, I heard a loud bang from behind us, and I swear that a bullet went right by my head. It was just this really strange whizzing sound. I can't say for sure. All we knew is that someone had fired off a shot, and to this day I believe that a bullet or something went right by my head. Bob and I kept running to the street that led to our school. We crossed over it, almost getting hit by 2 cars. We jumped another fence and started running willy-nilly through Bob's neighborhood, and he said to cut over here to get to his house. I followed him, and we finally burst through his back door, and he led me down to the basement. His mom called out, "Bob, is that you?" And he said, "Yeah, Mom, I'm just down here with a friend." Oh, I guess we were friends at that point. We collapsed into 2 chairs, not saying a word, just breathing heavily. Then we were just staring at each other, and I piped up, "Holy shit, man, did that guy shoot at us?" Big Bob nodded his head. We didn't say a word for another few minutes, and I asked, "Should we tell somebody about this?" He said, "I don't know, should we?" And I shook my head. Those guys probably couldn't have recognized us, and I certainly didn't want any more trouble. Neither did Bob. I looked at him again and said, "You still want to fight me?" And a big smile came over his face, and he said, "No, man, no." We ended up talking for another hour or so, me blowing off dinner and his mom bringing pizza down to us. He kept saying how he should never even have been out there. Had he not stopped me, I probably would have just gotten to my car and gone home. And that's when I remembered my car, and to call my parents to let them know where I was and that I was okay. Bob and I ended up becoming best friends after that. As a matter of fact, he convinced me to go to the college that he was going to when he graduated. We're still friends to this day. I was the best man in his wedding, and he was the best man in mine. Funny how a terrifying time can make enemies the best of friends. We still laugh about that night, even though one of us could have gotten shot. 2 idiot guys who got unified by a larger group of idiot guys. I've been through lots of other things in my life, including time in the military, but that night still stands out as one of the scariest things that's happened to me. Thankfully, in the military, I was never shot at. The time at school was the only time. I don't recommend it. Manhunt game, submitted by Universal Jazz. Growing up in the 80s and early 90s, we had a cool neighborhood and played a lot of games with all the kids who lived there. We had the normal pickup games of baseball and football and hotbox before the bus came to pick us up in the morning. But the nighttime games were always way more fun. Stuff like hide and seek, capture the flag, and what we always just referred to as Army. We also played a game called Manhunt, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. It's kind of like reverse hide and seek, where one person hides and everyone else has to look for him or her. Super fun, as we would get into teams of 2 or 3 and then spend time running around in between houses of their neighborhood looking for the fugitive in hiding. We were always coming up with new and cool ways to hide, but there were basic rules like you couldn't go inside a garage or a house or a shed. Wherever you did hide, it had to be semi-out in the open. We had a creek that ran around our neighborhood, and that was a border. You couldn't hide on the other side of that. There were woods between the neighborhood and the creek, so a lot of times that's where people hid. Coming up with new places to hide was always a challenge after you've played it so many times, but it was never a boring time when we were playing Manhunt. The time that I'm about to tell you happened in the fall, a couple of weeks before Halloween. I lived in the Northeast, so the sun goes down fairly early at that time of the year, and it does get a little cooler out. Certainly not the freezing of winter, but that time of year when everyone is wearing sweatshirts and stuff when we played outside. It was a Saturday night, and a bunch of us in our early teens decided to get together and play some Manhunt before going to one guy's house, my friend John's, to watch a movie and have popcorn. I will say right now that our neighborhood was fairly tight-knit. Everyone knew each other, and if families weren't good friends, we all certainly knew everyone on a first-name basis. This is long before the 24-hour news cycle of the terrors of what happens when kids play alone outside. Back then it was basically, tell us where you're going, stick around the neighborhood, and if you hear us calling, get your ass home. Everyone also had their own method of calling the kids home. My dad had a very powerful whistle, some families had air horns, other dads would just yell. At any rate, we all met in my backyard around 7 o'clock to start the first of the manhunts. My buddy Rick was chosen, and he was never a good manhunter player. He always wanted to be the hunted, but he sucked at it, and we always found him within a short amount of time. I will say this, our version of Manhunter might not be the same as what anyone listening might have played. The hunted could move around if someone yelled out, "Fugitive!" That allowed them to continue the game and made for more fun for everyone rather than just someone hiding in the bushes. But like I said, and I'm saying this because I know he'll listen to this, Rick sucked. One team found him right away, and we had to change up who the man to be hunted was. I teamed up with my other friend Casey, and there were 3 other teams of 2, with the odd man out being the manhunted. After Rick's flaming debacle, my friend Jordan was going to be on the run. So we gave him his 5 minutes, and then all the teams started to fan out to look for him. Casey and I took off towards the woods near the creek, and I figured Jordan was going to find a new spot there. He, like the rest of us, loved to play the game, but also liked to keep things fresh. Some guys had their go-to spots, which kind of made the game boring. We were all wearing camouflage or dark clothing except for a couple of people. And on this particular night, Jordan was wearing a dark blue or black hoodie. I think the only thing white on it was an Adidas logo, and that caused some trouble for me. Jordan had hid pretty well, and it was about 15 minutes into the game, and no one had found him yet. We bumped into the other teams, and they still hadn't a clue where he was. One of the teams went back into the housing part of the neighborhood, while Casey and I and the other team stayed in the woods and along the bed of the creek. Still, we couldn't find Jordan. He was whipping our ass at this point, and Casey and I decided to split up to maximize our hunting efforts, but stayed within earshot. I was creeping along the bed of the creek with the moonlight shining off the creek when I glimpsed someone behind a big rock that I knew had to be Jordan. Dark sweatshirt, new spot, had to be Jordan. Part of the rules were you had to stay in place until someone spotted you, and I was beginning to think, though, that Jordan was breaking the rules by moving around on us. I would be so happy if I could catch him. I didn't say anything as I got nearer to the figure, and my thoughts were correct. As I got closer, the dark shape got up and started to move towards the woods. I kept along, being as quiet as I could, just following, and again, not yelling out or anything. I was going to prove that Jordan was a cheater. I didn't hear anyone else around. I just kept following the dark figure as it walked through the trails of the woods, then came up to a clearing before a bridge that separated our neighborhood from another neighborhood in town. It was a big bridge with a big road that had lights all the way across it. Basically it split the village where I grew up. Going on the other side of the bridge was certainly way out of bounds, but that's where Jordan was heading. I was so psyched I was going to bust him, but wanted to do it under the lights of the bridge so everyone who was playing would know he was a cheater. I stopped and whispered for Casey, but didn't hear anything back, and when I looked back at the edge of the woods, I realized that no one else was over where we were. I just kept following Jordan to another pile of boulders right before the bridge, but I noticed he had been speeding up, so I had to pick up the pace to catch him. When I got to the big boulders, I knew he was hiding somewhere amongst them, and finally yelled out, "Hey, asshole, you're done cheating." From behind me I heard something, but before I could turn around, a forearm got me in a headlock and started to pull me towards the bridge. I quickly realized this was not Jordan. This was someone much bigger and stronger than me. I was trying to yell and fight back, because I knew this person dragging me underneath the bridge was just taking me farther away from my friends. The farther I was dragged away, the less anyone would be apt to hear or see something wrong. The guy never said anything, except one time he said, "Shut up, kid," as he pulled me along underneath the bridge towards the other side. When we got there, thankfully, there was a group of older kids drinking beer at the edge of the bridge. These were the kids that we all called the dirtbags, but looking back, they were just the same as everyone else. Funny how guys who did that stuff were looked down upon as the bad kids, but when we all played sports and did the same thing, we were studs. When they saw me getting dragged along, I saw all of them stand up with their beer cans, and one guy in a very harsh voice said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He wasn't speaking to me, he was speaking to the guy, who then stopped dragging me and let go of his headlock a little bit. I was beyond terrified at that point, despite being 13 years old. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was thinking, but he certainly had bad intentions if he was dragging me along as far as he did. I heard the guy start saying something about me being his little brother, and he was trying to get me home because I was late. But then I recognized one of the guys in the gang as a dude who lived in my neighborhood that we all liked, despite our parents saying he was a bad kid. His name was Eric, and he had long black hair, listened to heavy metal, and had a really beat-up Camaro that we all thought was awesome. He recognized me right away and said, "I don't fucking think so, dude," and all the guys, all four of them, started to come over to us. The guy tightened his grip on my neck for a second, and then he threw me to the side and I fell into the creek. The guy made a run for it and got past Eric and his friends, but when he got into the light from the other side of the bridge, he turned to look at us, and the hood that he had on his sweatshirt pulled back, and it was a guy I would say was maybe in his 30s, thinning hair, he had a weird pinched face, and I remember he had some teeth missing. He ran like the wind away from us after Eric and his friends chased him for a bit, after coming back to me to make sure I was okay. I was fine, other than just being scared and soaking wet. Eric told me to get on home and to not worry about the guy. He offered me a beer, but I was only 13 and I didn't think it was a good idea at the time. I thanked him and his friends and started hauling my butt back to my friends. When I got to them, I told them what happened, and they told me Jordan had been cheating, but no one had cared at that point after they heard my story. We all went back to my friend's house for the movie, and I told his dad what happened. He immediately called my dad and made me tell him what happened, and my dad said I had to go home. I thought he was mad at me at first, but when I got there, we called the police to let them know what happened. He was happy I was safe. The police were already ahead of us. Apparently, the guy had been called on for peeping into the windows of another house while we were playing, and then he did it again in another neighborhood on the other side of the bridge after he let go of me. They picked him up, and from what I learned over the next couple of days, he was a guy who lived in the town over from us who was considered one of those weird guys. That's what we called them back then, but today we just call them out for the pedophiles that they are. I have no idea what happened to him after that, but we were all scared as kids for a little bit to be running around in the dark. Despite the fact that we knew he had been arrested, the specter of a guy like that hanging out where kids were playing was pretty spooky. Eventually we got back to playing Manhunt and all of our other games, but there was always an element of horror whenever we went out at night. Our parents changed rules for us for a little bit, but things went back to normal not very long after. Sometimes when I go back to visit my parents who still live in that neighborhood, I'll go for a walk down by the creek at night and kind of relive that scary time. It sounds kind of lame as I write this down and send it to you, but as an adult, it really hits home how creepy some people are, how danger really can be lurking around every corner, and how I was super lucky that Eric and his buddies were there to put a stop to something that probably would have ended up very bad for me. When my kids were growing up, I let them do their thing too, and I hate when people say things are so much different now, because they're not. The same predators were out there when I was a kid as they were in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, and all the way back. We just hear so much more about them now. Always be safe is what I preach to my kids, and I advise the adults of kids today to do the same. My One Night Stand, submitted by Ash. All of those times I thought I was invincible usually happened during my 20s. What is it about that age that makes you think you can handle everything and everyone? I learned the hard way. I was visiting my sister at college. She was going to school in a large college city. Lots of bars, lots of drinking, lots of college kids all feeling invincible. And there I was, at a bar that I knew nobody except my sister, drinking and laughing at strangers' jokes. Before long, I was introduced to a cute boy, around my age, possibly a little younger. My sister introduced us, and we hit it right off. I will admit, the alcohol definitely added to his personality. I was absolutely looking through beer goggles. He was also pretty intoxicated, but I didn't care. We were young and having fun. Before long, he asked if I wanted to leave. I knew exactly what that meant. And yes, I was up for it. I didn't know anything about him, could not hear what he was yelling in my ear at the bar. I just thought he was cute. I know, how stupid of me. I left with him, but not before telling my sister I was going. She couldn't really hear me through the music and the other people talking and yelling, but I wasn't aware of that. We went to where I do not even know to this day. I was a complete stranger in that town, so leaving with this guy was stupid and dangerous. As I mentioned already, I felt like nothing could harm me. I would learn to regret my decision to leave with him that night. I don't remember where we walked to get to his apartment. I just remember flirting the whole way, enjoying his company for what it was worth. We got to his house, and it was an efficiency apartment. One large room with a small room off of the main room for a bathroom. The kitchen was in the main room. Not much furniture, a mattress on the floor, and clothes left lying everywhere. I do remember he explained that he was with the police force, narcotics division specifically. He would raid drug houses weekly with his partner and other police officers. It was dangerous, and he had been involved in many weapon exchanges. Very scary and dangerous job for someone so young, I thought. Soon we were making out on the mattress, getting to the business at hand. I wasn't sure how far I wanted to go with this guy, but the alcohol that was coursing through my veins took over. Next thing I knew, we were lying in bed naked, talking and slightly dozing on and off. I asked for a glass of water and began to take notice of my surroundings while he went to get it. His uniform was on the floor, and there was other police paraphernalia around that I was unaccustomed to. I began to look at all the little things, taking notice of who this guy was. The alcohol was wearing off, and my alertness was coming back. Who was this guy, I thought? As I looked about, I noticed he had received a few accommodations for his bravery. Cool. He had a lot of the typical young guys things. Shot glasses, alcohol bottles, some empty, some half full, and toiletries lying about. Not much food, but scraps of what he had recently eaten were scattered about as well. Typical, right? Then I noticed the gun, and a knife, and another gun. I don't know anything about weapons, but the one closest to the bed was very large, black, and shiny. I began to get a little frightened. I mean, not terribly so, because he was an officer of the law, right? I figured he knew about safety, and probably all people who were cops had stuff like this in their home. I was so young and naive. I took the water from him and took a sip. He must have noticed me looking at his things and began to talk about his job. I asked him a question about the guns, and he responded that most cops have some of their weapons at home. He had gotten a few guns from his uncles who were also on the force, so okay, no alarms yet. Then, as I was looking down at the floor, I felt a metallic circle pressed against my temple. "Dare me to pull the trigger?" he asked. Holy shit, I thought. What do I say? I went blank, completely bereft of words. Why does that happen? Time slows down into milliseconds. But then something came to mind and I blurted out, "I've never held a gun before. Can I hold it?" Without hesitating, he handed over the gun and I pretended to be amazed at the weapon in my hands. Actually, I was shaking. I steadied my hands the best way I could, and I asked him dumb questions that I can't even remember this day, just to distract him. He answered, then got up to use the toilet. Thank God he shut the door. I quickly opened the chamber, and yes, it was fully loaded. Now I was shaking all over. I quickly emptied it, threw the bullets under the mattress, and then went looking for the other guns I had seen around the room. I did the same thing with those, and they were all loaded. And then I sat back down in my previous position. When he came out of the bathroom, I explained I had an early flight home and had to be getting back. I mean, that was a lie. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. Since the alcohol was wearing off, we both seemed to be over the attraction we first felt. He gladly took me to my sister's house, where I snuck back inside. She was furious with me for leaving with him. I didn't know it at the time, but that was her friend's boyfriend. He never mentioned that, and if my sister told me in the bar, I didn't hear her. Regardless, I told her what happened, and all she could focus on was that I left that night with that guy and hurt her friend's feelings. I told her that he was crazy, but my protests fell on deaf ears. I just went to the airport that morning, and my sister and I did not speak for a few months afterwards. Meanwhile, I had given that guy my phone number. Stupid, right? But I would have agreed to anything just to get out of his apartment that night and away from him. I answered only 3 times when he called. I went to a school very far away from him, so I felt it was safe to maintain a phone relationship with him. The first call was a few weeks after this incident, and he told me that he had just lost his partner. He was drunk off his ass and explained it had happened when they busted a drug house. His partner shot while he was right next to him. A few weeks later, he called again, and there was another death in his unit. He was drunk again. I got the picture. He used alcohol to escape from the job and the fatalities, and I could understand that to some degree. But the gun to my head? That was a different story. That was just scary and insane. Do I need to say I learned a very valuable lesson that night? I would say yes, but not entirely. Did that stop the crazy behavior on my part? I never ever went home with anyone I did not know or recognize after that. I always checked with my friends before I left to make sure they knew where I was going and who I was with. I mean, let's be clear. I didn't make a habit out of this, but still not a bright idea. But I was young and infallible, right? Nope. This is a story I tell to warn others about the danger of doing things like that. I hope they take this to heart and learn from my mistakes. Possible abduction, submitted by Selma S. I can't say what exactly happened because I'm still unsure to this day how or why it happened. But when I was around 7 or 8, my brother and I shared a room together. I was in the top bunk and he was on the bottom. It was an uneventful night. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened leading up to us going to bed. I remember waking up in the middle of the night. I usually always wake up 1 or 2 times a night, so this wasn't any different to me. I just turned over and tried to go back to sleep. I noticed that I was cold. I tried to tug my blanket over me thinking it was off, and that would explain why I was cold. But it was already on me. and that's when I noticed I was completely naked under my covers. At first I thought I was just half asleep, and I was stuck in a dream. But I quickly realized that wasn't the case, and I frantically looked for my clothes under the blankets. They just weren't there. I was too sleepy to freak out at that point. I just wanted to get some clothes on as fast as I could without waking up anyone, let alone my brother. Maybe go back to sleep. I remember sprinting to turn the lights on, grabbing whatever clothes I could find from my drawers, and then booking it to the restroom. I thought I was the only one up, so when I heard a knock at the door, I jumped a bit. It was my mom, and she was asking what I was doing. Too confused and a bit scared to tell her, I just said I had to use the restroom. That was good enough for her, so she left and we both went back to bed. Thinking back now, I've always used the restroom in the middle of the night. I wonder why my mom chose that night to check up on me. I don't know, maybe it was a mom instinct she felt. When I got back to bed, I lay there, and I thought about it more and more, how weird it was for me to wake up like that. And it started to freak me out. So I walked over to my parents' room, and I tried to wake up my mom as quietly as possible. But she woke up with a gasp. I feel like almost all moms do that. No matter how lately you try to wake them up, they will always wake up as if there's a serial killer right in front of them. She woke up, and I told her what had happened. I know she thought it was weird too, but I guess to make me feel more at ease, she just walked me over to my bed and put me back asleep. I did go to sleep, and in the morning I yanked off all my blankets. And there they were, all my clothes from the night before. I could have sworn that they weren't anywhere in my bed, but there they were. To this day, I'm not sure what happened that night, and I've chalked it up to sleepwalking. I used to be a very weird kid with a weird sleepwalking issue, and scared my dad a couple of times with it. But all of those episodes stopped when I was about 5. My parents liked to tease me that I was abducted by aliens. Maybe I was, who's to say otherwise? Anyways, that was probably the weirdest thing that has happened to me ever. Hitchhiking Ghost, submitted by Michael G. I'm not one who believes a whole lot in the paranormal. There are things that can't be explained, but to believe that ghosts are everywhere, following us, waiting to either scare us or hurt us, that's not my belief. That being said, a few weeks ago in late January, we had a massive cold hit us in St. Adèle, Quebec, Canada. It was 30 below or more, with a wind chill factor that made it feel like it was 40 below. For any of you wondering out there, Celsius and Fahrenheit are the same when it's minus 30 or 40. It was like this for at least 4 days. When I went out to shovel after the cold ended, it was only 4 below then, and I shoveled in my t-shirt. On one of the nights where it was really cold, I had to heat up my car for at least 15 minutes before going anywhere. That's if you wanted to be comfortable while driving. I took my usual route home from work, and I was glad there weren't too many cars on the road. When I arrived at my street, I saw that there was a woman where the sidewalk turned. So instead of driving straight to my block apartment building, I stopped beside her and asked her if everything was all right. She was an older woman. She was wearing a body-length white winter coat, and she had a shoulder bag and, thankfully, winter boots. She told me she'd been waiting for her ride for half an hour. Being that cold outside, I asked her if she needed a ride. She didn't hesitate and got in. I was happy that I had a car with heated seats. I activated the heater in the passenger seat. With my car being so warm for driving for 20-ish minutes, she got comfortable pretty fast. We started with the usual chatter, her thanking me for stopping, me saying it was only natural because it was so cold out, and I asked her where she thought her ride could be. She said that she probably gave him the wrong directions or something, because she's always doing that accidentally, and that one day it would be the death of her. I didn't really pay attention to her comments, as I was on the lookout for her street name near the Tim Hortons in Vaux-David. It's about 10 minutes north of St. Adèle, if you go by car, that is. I saw the road and told her, "Hey, we're here." She was glad and let out a little sigh. She told me to take the next right, and her house would be on the right. I asked her which one, because there were maybe 6 houses, and I didn't know which one to stop in front of. She just said, "You can let me out here." and I looked at her, and she seemed to be startled in a way. I guess it was just me not understanding what she was feeling or thinking, so I didn't insist. I just pulled over and she got out. She thanked me before closing my door, and I waited till she walked away a bit before doing a 3-point turn. After I did, I decided to wait until she had walked into her house, just in case she might have slipped and then had to spend the rest of the freezing night outside. But I couldn't see her anymore. I looked around in my side view mirror, but I couldn't see her at all anywhere. I decided to step out of my car, fearing the worst, and then followed her footsteps to make sure she didn't slip and hurt herself. But her footprints abruptly stopped. They were right on the side of the road, no sidewalk, but they didn't turn to the right as you would expect when someone walked up to their front entrance, and they were the same distance apart as they had been with every step. I didn't measure them, obviously, but the left step she took was the last. There weren't any other steps for me to get confused with, and there wasn't even a small ditch on the side of the road, so it's not like her right foot would have slipped and have her fall in. She just wasn't there. I was freezing my ass off, so I ran back to my car and decided to drive around slowly to try and see her, but I never did. I looked for her for about 5 minutes more before deciding to head back home. My thoughts immediately turned to ghosts, but I quickly dismissed that. I didn't believe in ghosts, but what else could she have been? Once I got home, I started looking online for articles of people that may have frozen to death in my immediate area. I found several articles relating to such news, but not where I live. It got me to thinking that maybe, just maybe, a soul or spirit had wandered around and gotten lost. Maybe she was able to cross over now that someone had given her a ride. Whatever the case, I just don't know what happened to her, or where she went. More Than Lock Your Doors, submitted by Carol Y. This story started when I was a little girl, but continued into my late teens. The first house my parents bought when I was 5 years old. Up until that time, we'd been living in apartments, and my parents found a house they really liked for what I now understand was a very cheap price. I had no idea about the history of the house at the time, but I would find out later why the price was so right. When we first moved in, I really loved it. My sister and I had our own rooms, we had a big backyard to play in, and I was just starting school. There were new kids in the neighborhood that became my fast friends, and it was just so much nicer than living in the apartment we had been living in before. This was a long time ago, but even at that age, I could appreciate why my parents bought the house. They bought it in August, and we moved in just in time for school to start. And around that time, I started to wake up in the night and see a woman standing in my room. It wasn't all ghostly or anything. It looked like a real woman with long, scraggly hair standing there, holding something in her hand. Even though I was scared, I would usually just close my eyes, and after a while when I opened them, the woman would be gone. I told my parents, and they told me it was just a dream and that I shouldn't eat as many sweets as I did before bed. Honestly, it did feel like a dream, so I listened to them, and when I would wake up, my room would be empty. A dream it must have been. But around Christmas time, it happened again. I woke up, and there stood this woman. In the dark, I could see she was holding a hammer. And that really scared me, and I screamed. I closed my eyes and heard my dad running up from the basement. He'd been down there putting together some of our toys for Christmas, and my mom was at work at the time. She worked an overnight shift as an ER nurse. I should mention that my bedroom was the only bedroom on the first floor. My parents were wary about me being there, away from my sister and them when I slept, but I loved all the windows and begged for that room. When I heard my dad running up the stairs, I opened my eyes and the woman was gone. My dad came in asking if everything was okay, what was wrong, and he had a frantic look on his face. I told him that the woman I had told him about before was back in my room, and it wasn't a dream. My dad flicked the lights on instead of just standing with the hall light on and looked down at my floor. He didn't say anything right away, but even at 5, I looked around and saw wet footprints on my carpet. They came and went out from my door. My dad told me to stay where I was and turned around and went into the hall and was gone for a minute. He was checking the doors and windows and also on my sister. She had woken up from my scream all the way upstairs. Then I heard my dad make a phone call to my mom, and I overheard him saying he didn't want to scare her, but something happened and he didn't want her to not know that he was calling the police. I couldn't make out much of the conversation, but I did pick up on the words footprints, and I heard him saying, "I don't know, all the doors are locked." My dad did call the police, and in the middle of the night, there they were, talking while my sister and I had hot cocoa in the kitchen. The police were very nice and asked me questions about what I saw, and I also mentioned at that point that I had seen the woman before, but had thought it was a dream. My dad had his hand on my shoulder and said, "Yeah, that is true," but at the time, he figured it was a dream. The police looked around and then looked around outside. There wasn't much to look at. The grass was wet, but this was in the south and we didn't have any snow or anything like that. The police talked to my dad again and then left saying to call if anything else happened. My dad was and is a great guy, and he knew that my sister and I were shook up. It was about 1:30 in the morning at this point, and neither of us could sleep. So my dad did his best and made a game out of it. He said we could all sleep in his room and watch a video on my parents' TV. He propped up all of the pillows to make a sort of makeshift fort to protect us, and then he made us some popcorn too. We all eventually fell asleep and were woken up by my mom when she came home in the morning. Christmas came and was awesome, and eventually all of this was forgotten by me and my sister. But every once in a while, my dad and mom would have a conversation that we weren't supposed to listen to. It wasn't until later in life that he told me that they had been talking about the owners of the house previous to us moving in. My dad was an avid hunter and had lots of guns he kept in a safe in the basement. When I was a little older, I learned that he kept one in his sock drawer, a .45 he would later teach me to shoot. So the years went rolling by and nothing else happened in the house, and my childhood was really great. All of the things that had happened were forgotten, and my sister and I just grew up with awesome parents, great friends. We loved our school, we were really involved there, and it was just a great place to live. That is, until my freshman year of college when I came home for Christmas break. My mom had changed my room around a little bit, but it was still a bedroom, and that's where I would stay when I was home. I still loved all those windows. One night during the week between Christmas and New Year's, I was talking to my new boyfriend who lived about an hour away. I was hoping he would come over to meet my parents during the break, and we were planning that visit. We talked into the late night and eventually hung up. I got up to get a drink of water, brushed my teeth, and was really tired from the day and just fell asleep with all of my clothes on while I laid on my bed. Sometime in the night, I heard a noise that woke me up. Usually I slept with a radio on. I love talk radio, and now I fall asleep listening to your stories, Uncle Josh. But this sound sounded like my door opening, and it was enough to wake me up. I opened my eyes and cleared out some of the sleep to see a woman with long, scraggly hair standing in my bedroom. I froze, a scream stuck in my throat that wouldn't come out. It was the same woman. She looked a lot older, but it was the same woman. And the shock of my life came when I saw that she was holding a hammer in her hand. I sat there frozen, staring at her as she just stared back at me. She didn't say a word, just stood there staring at me. I started to speak, and she raised her arm up with the hammer. Now I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could, and the woman stopped raising her arm and put her other hand to her mouth with a finger up in front of her lips and said, "It'll be over in a second." I sat up in bed, and she sort of moved towards me, and I heard my father running to my room. He got there and flicked the lights on, and I could see he was holding up his .45. He was also taken aback by the woman standing in my room. For a second, nothing happened until he screamed, "Who the fuck are you? Get away from my daughter!" At that point, he was now pointing the gun at the woman's back, as she hadn't even bothered to turn and look at him. Dad wasn't waiting for her to respond. He slammed his knee into the back of her knee, and she fell over with a yell onto the ground, dropping the hammer. My mother came up behind my dad, and my father screamed, "Sherry, call the fucking cops!" The woman just lay there on the ground, not saying anything, but kind of crying. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I peed my pants, I was so afraid. So my mom was freaking out as she called 911, and my sister wasn't home, and the only other thing going bonkers was my golden retriever, funnily enough named Bonkers. Bonky kept trying to get by my dad to get to me, but he was holding him back, keeping his .45 pointed at this woman laying on the floor. A few minutes later, the police arrived and got the woman up and out of my room. She didn't say anything at first, but just looked at me with these crazy eyes and said, "It would have been over in a second." I had no idea what she meant, but I think she was inferring that she was going to kill me. Yeah, that's a little bit of a thought to have as a late teenager. Long story short, this woman had lived in the house before my parents had bought it. She had always been a disturbed young girl who never got treatment because her parents were also really messed up. She had once tried attacking her mother with a hammer, so they kept her locked in a room in the house for 15 years of her life, until other family members stepped in and got her removed for treatment. She severely needed that treatment. Something happened to the parents, and some other issues came up with the house, and I don't really know what happened to them, but I know they lost custody of the girl, and they were forced to sell the house. Now here's the kicker. This woman had been let out of a treatment facility on her own recognizance. She was now in her early 30s, and come to find out that when I was 5, she'd actually escaped from the same place. So basically, she got out twice. And here's the other kicker. My parents had never changed the locks on the house. This crazy woman had remembered a spare key that her parents had hidden somewhere outside near our back door. She had simply just gotten the key and gotten into our house. I mean, how fucked up is that? And how fucked up is it that every time she came in, when she left, she put the key back in its hidden spot? I suppose the early lesson here is change your locks the minute you get a new place. The police arrested her, and the whole rigmarole started all over again, with her not being competent to stand trial, and she was remanded to another mental health facility. She's still there now, and while we couldn't prove that she was going to harm or kill me, the prosecutors made a good case that she at least was posing a very dangerous threat, and that she remained locked up in the facility without the possibility of getting out again. I don't know how any of that works, but this last thing happened about 25 years ago, and like I said, as far as I know, she's still where she was. After I graduated from college, my parents sold the place, and all of us moved to different states. I don't think we had anything to do with this woman personally. She was just going back to the only place she knew. Where she got the hammer, nobody knew. It was not one of ours. Now I have my own family, and I made sure to change the locks on both of the houses I've lived in. My sister and I still tease my parents for not changing the locks in the first place on that first house. I mean, after all of this time, we can sort of joke about it. But the truth is, sometimes in the night I do wake up and think that I see that woman standing in my room. I know she's not there, but I guess it's something that will always be stuck in my mind and in my dreams for the rest of my life. What Happened After, submitted by Devin O. This happened 10 years ago when I was 13. I grew up in the suburbs in a neighborhood with a lot of my close friends. It was a tight-knit neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and all the parents, if not good friends, were on a first-name basis. We were given a lot of leeway as far as our free time because we usually just stuck around the neighborhood. It was situated right outside of our village where there was a boys and girls club we all hung out at, and a creek on the far side of the neighborhood that we all hung out at a lot too. These were the days before our partying in the woods and all that kind of thing. Sort of right on the edge of that time, and most people's lives where they start experimenting with drugs and alcohol. Our little group was mixed with boys and girls all ranging from ages 10 to 15. After that, most of the older kids hung out in their own group doing their own thing, which is the normal progression, I suppose. Anyway, we would swim in the creek in the summer in some of the deeper spots, but this story is about when we would get big storms and the creek would kind of turn into a small river. Most of the time in the summer, the creek was only about a foot deep or so, outside of the deeper swimming holes, so there was no lazy river rafting or anything like that. However, when it would rain, the water would rise up significantly, and there were lots of rapids, and us kids being stupid would get inner tubes and whatnot and get in the water to float down the creek. This was stupid for a lot of reasons. All of the rains and storms would send a lot of dead trees and branches down our way, and like I mentioned, the rapids would get a little crazy. Lots of big rocks on both sides of the creek as well as underwater. The normally tame water would turn into a torrent, and we would start at a bridge and let the fast-moving water carry us down to another bridge. We'd done it a bunch of times, and no one had ever gotten hurt, but almost every time someone had squealed to a parent, and we all got read the riot act of how dangerous and stupid it was to go in the water when it was that unpredictable. Strangely, we never got banned from hanging out at the creek. We just got yelled at for going down there when we knew it was a bad idea anyway, but still did it. The last time we did it is what I'm talking about now. There was a group of 6 of us: Jay, Ben, Carter, his brother Kurt, and Dakota. We were hanging out in Carter's basement just playing video games on a lazy summer morning and talking about what we were going to do for the rest of the day. That's when the storm came in, and we immediately got the idea, if the water got high enough, to go tubing. This set everyone in a scramble, running back to their houses in the rain to find their inner tubes and bring them back to Carter's house. He had a pump in the garage, and we could blow up all of our inner tubes there. All of our parents were at work, and while the cat's away, the mice certainly did play. We were getting fired up as the rain kept coming down, and said that as soon as the lightning and thunder stopped, we would go and check out the water and see if there would be enough to tube. The major part of the storm moved away and took the lightning and thunder with it, but it kept raining. Trying to keep a low profile so as not to let the other parents in the neighborhood know where we were going was pretty hard. The only way to get there was down the street, and anyone who looked out the window would see 6 kids carrying inner tubes. Wouldn't take a genius to tip them off where we were headed. But we took the risk, and no one noticed. I should mention that Carter's little brother Kurt was the youngest, and he was 10. God, it's giving me chills just thinking about this now. We got down to the creek, and sure enough, the waters were raging. Throwing caution to the wind and yelling excitedly, we got into the water slowly by the first bridge, and one by one pushed ourselves out into the middle of the creek. And again, one by one, we all zipped away, yelling and laughing as the current took us downstream. Every once in a while, somebody would fall off their tube and stand up as the water was deep enough to tube, but still shallow enough to stand up, maybe only knee or hip high. That was never the trouble. It was the current moving super fast that would just knock you over again, and even though it was dangerous, we were all laughing and making fun of each other as we fell off, climbed back onto our tubes, and made our way to the second bridge. When we all got there safe and sound, we sat on the side of the creek laughing and reliving the funnier parts of the trip where guys fell off and couldn't get back on their tubes, all that sort of thing. We talked about doing it another time, but someone walking across the bridge saw us and yelled at us that if we didn't get out of the water, he was going to call the cops. More than one of us yelled back the general teenage angst stuff of "fuck you, mind your own business," and all those kinds of comments. But we also didn't want to get busted, so we grabbed our stuff and began walking back to our neighborhood. This is when things went wrong. For some reason, Kurt and Carter were fighting. Kurt kept saying he wanted to go again, and Carter, being a bigger brother, was not wanting to hear his whining. He kept telling him to shut up and that we were going home when Kurt decided that he was going with or without any of us. Before we knew what we could do, Kurt jumped into the water with his inner tube and zipped down the creek. Carter started calling him names and telling him to get his ass out of the water, but even though we tried running after him, we lost sight of him at a bend in the creek about a quarter mile before the next bridge where we had just walked from. All of us dropped our inner tubes and ran alongside the creek to catch up to Kurt when we heard a muffled scream. With the water rushing as much as it was and the rain still coming down, it made it really hard to hear, but we clearly knew that he was in trouble. When we got around the bend, we couldn't see him. He was gone. I saw his inner tube floating quickly away and just yelled out, "Oh, shit!" At first we didn't know what to do. We all just stood there, until I can't remember who of the group said, "We gotta find him." Initially, Carter thought maybe it was all a joke, and that Kurt had gotten on the other side of the creek and was hiding in some bushes trying to prank us. But it quickly became obvious that that wasn't the case. All of us were panicking, wading into the fast-moving water, looking for any sign of him. We were screaming his name and saying that it wasn't funny and to come out. Jay and I were walking together in the water, and I was kind of holding on to his arm. And that's when he bumped into something he knew was not a rock underwater. The muddy water was moving so fast he couldn't see anything, but when he bumped into whatever it was, Kurt's arm came up to the surface. We both started screaming and tugging at his arm. The other guys realized what was going on and came over to help, and we slowly dislodged Kurt from where he had gotten stuck. There was some faint blood trickling down his temple. Jay was in Scouts and knew first aid and CPR, and after we dragged Kurt onto the bank of the creek, he set to work trying to revive him. I didn't know what to do and just stood there dumbfounded while two of the other guys ran to get help. None of us had our cell phones with us. None of us brought them into the rain or the water. I'm going to skip ahead because I don't like to think about much of this, but I'll just leave it and say Kurt died. He was dead before we got him to the side of the creek. After the police, fire department, and paramedics got there and did their investigation, they determined that he most likely fell off his inner tube, went underwater and hit his head on some rocks, and then got stuck between a couple of them. He was only 10 years old. At first, our parents didn't yell at us. Everyone was just in shock over Kurt's death. Everybody was more numb. We knew what we had done was stupid, but none of us thought anything bad like this was going to happen. The police asked a ton of questions, and our parents all came home from work. And like I said, at first it was a lot of crying and sympathy. But later, the anger came out pretty freely after the initial shock. That night, I lay on my bed just bawling my eyes out. I was so upset that Kurt had died, but still in a state of shock that it was me and Jay who found him. I don't know if anyone listening to this has ever had a friend die like something like this, or if they've ever found a dead body, but I tell you, it's something that stays with you for the rest of your life. And on the evening of it happening, obviously it was still super fresh in my mind. I could hear my parents downstairs talking to my older sister, and then both of them talking to other parents in the neighborhood on the phone. I just lay there crying, wanting to text my friends, but not finding the energy to do it. I finally fell asleep, but was woken up in the middle of the night by my phone. It was vibrating that I had received a call. When I checked, it was from an unknown number, so I just blew it off. As I laid back down, it rang again, and I answered it, but no one was there. Just the sound of running water. I immediately thought it was a fucking joke, and said into the phone, "This isn't funny, asshole. Go fuck yourself." I hung up and got upset all over again. My dad came in to check on me, and though I knew he was very pissed off at me, he sat next to me and was very comforting. I didn't tell him why I woke up and about the phone call. And after he left my room, I got a text from Jay. It just said, "Hey, did you just call me?" I replied, "No, but someone called me." I went into my closet so my parents couldn't hear me, and I called him. We had both gotten the same phone call with the same running water sound at the exact same time. While I was looking out of my closet door into my room, I saw a dark shadow move past my window. My bedroom is on the second floor, so I had to rub my eyes to see if I was really seeing something. I told Jay what I had just seen, and he said, "Hang on a second." And when he spoke again, he said, "Holy shit, I just saw the same thing." We were both freaking out and trying to talk each other out of both the things we had heard and seen, but we both knew that we had heard and seen those things. Just then I heard a bunch of noise outside my room, and my parents had jumped out of bed and were moving down the hallway. My parents went into the bathroom, and my father said, "What the hell?" And my mother said she was going downstairs to check. What was going on at both my house and Jay's house was every faucet and every toilet either flushed or turned on at the same time. While I was trying to tell him what was happening at my house, he was trying to tell me what was happening at his house. I told him we needed to talk about it tomorrow, even though I wanted to run to his house right then. We figured we should just get back into bed so as not to make our parents think we were doing something stupid. That's what we did, and it was a good move as my parents came into my room right after they had run around the house turning all the taps off. The next day I asked if I could go over to Jay's house, and my parents said okay, but nowhere else. That was a rule going on in every one of our houses. We were allowed to go to one another's homes, but absolutely nowhere else. We also had to call our parents the minute we got there and the minute we were leaving to come home. We all ended up at Jay's house, except for Carter, for obvious reasons. And this is where it gets even more effed up. The same thing happened to all of our friends that night. They all got phone calls on their cells, and all of our faucets and toilets had turned on or flushed at the same time. The exact same thing happened in every house. We later found out that it didn't happen at Carter's house. We sat in Jay's backyard not knowing what to say, and we all promised not to say anything to Carter or his family, but we all wondered if it would happen again. It didn't. And the next few days were a blur of getting ready to put little Kurt to rest. Obviously, Carter was a mess for a long, long time. We're still friends to this day, and I know he is still hurt by all of this. I mean, we all are, but it was his little brother. Now here's the last weird part. The water thing started happening to Carter. I mean, all of the time. But not to us. Every month of the same day number of when Kurt left us, wherever Carter is, all the taps turn on and the toilets flush, no matter where he is. It's happened to him in his home. It's happened to him when he was at summer camp much later in life. It's happened at his grandparents' house. It's happened to him in hotel rooms. It's happened when he stayed over at a friend's house. I'm now 23 years old as I'm typing this. I have no explanation for why this happened to me and Jay and my friends, and all we can chalk it up to is that maybe it's Kurt's way of showing us that he was asking us for help. As for Carter, maybe it's a way of reminding him that he wasn't being the big brother he should have been and stopped Kurt from going in the water. I don't know, and I guess I'm rambling at this point. All I know is that this still happens to Carter. He's gotten used to it, but I know it still bothers him very much. I know he'll never get over losing his brother, kind of the same way we feel as we all treated him like our little brother. Every month, I hope it's the last month that this happens to Carter, and that Kurt finally lets him go. Dakota was always the weird one in our group and always into weird shit and said we should have some kind of seance or whatever when we were younger. He wanted to see if we could contact Kurt to ask him to stop, but none of us believed in that stuff. Like I said, I just hope it ends soon for Carter's sake. Wherever you are, Kurt, rest in peace, little buddy. We all miss you, and we all wish to God we had moved faster and stopped you from getting into the creek so many years ago. We love you, man.
Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. And if you have a true scary story about Halloween, please send that in immediately. Looking forward to another great Halloween extravaganza this year. Follow me on social media, links to that are in the description. And if you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give it a thumbs up? Leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. And if you're not a subscriber, hey, become a subscriber today. Maybe even tell a friend about my channel. I sure would appreciate it. It does help out with the algorithms. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.